I'm Jayson Jorgensen. It is once again time for another edition of HuskerChat. It's brought to you by Acres Equipment. As always, we are joined by the publisher of Husker Online, Sean Callahan, as we take a look back at Nebraska's loss against Minnesota and then a huge game coming up this Saturday morning at Colorado. Sean, thanks a lot for the time. I don't know how many times we've had conversations talking about near misses for Nebraska. I don't know how many more this fan base can take, but boy, Thursday had to be just so frustrating because Nebraska once again was right there but unable to finish.
Yeah, I mean, just kind of the same old, same old. I mean, they had complete control of the game. It felt like, gosh, they'd have to really try hard to figure out a way to lose this game, and that's what they did. I mean, Anthony Grant fumbles on a 9-yard run. That if they get the first down, that's another couple minutes of clock off the game. And worst case scenario is you're punting the ball back to Minnesota eventually deep into their own territory, and they've got to go to the length of the field to get 7 on you, which they had not done the whole half. Then even when they fumbled it, you're like, okay, worst case scenario is overtime. Then Jeff Sims throws the pick. So there was just so much about the way that game finished out. It was very tough to see Nebraska slip away an opportunity like that, even though nobody really was picking Nebraska to win this game. But I think when you watch it, you're like, well, Nebraska should win this game.
Now, certainly there's some positives to take out of it. I would think one of the biggest positives had to be the play of the defense. It looked like Tony White has certainly continued the improvement of that bunch made toward the second half of last year.
Yeah, I thought the tackling was outstanding. The physicality was great. And it really goes back to how they practice. I mean, you're seeing Nebraska do more good on good live work during the week. And you heard Ethan Piper this week say, he goes, our practices are harder than the game. And that's how Matt Rule wants it. So I do think their weekly approach, how Matt Rule attacks it, I think that's made a difference just with how it looked, at least in this first game out. And Nebraska is going to play physical. I mean, we saw that. And the defense was a real bright spot. I thought special teams play and the tackling, I mean, 3 different kickoff return attempts didn't cross the 20-yard line for Minnesota. And they did a very good job in punt coverage and other elements of special teams as well.
How about the offense? That's where they certainly struggled. It didn't help that Jeff Sims struggled, throwing 3 interceptions. Were you surprised to see Nebraska have the issues they had moving the ball? I mean, I know Minnesota has a nice defense, but I would think you had to hope the Huskers could move it a little better than that.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the throwing struggle. I mean, they ran for 200 plus yards of sack adjusted rush yards. I mean, that should win you a game like Minnesota. And you look at what Sims gave them, and then the backs, it was 200 plus yards. Take away the sacks, but Minnesota was dropping 7-8 guys a lot, and Sims had a hard time fitting the ball through the windows and seeing the field. And he tried to force some things, and we saw what happened. It was 3 interceptions on balls that he kind of tried to force in there. And that was surprising. It was very surprising to me that Billy Kemp was not involved in the game with 1 catch. Thomas Fedoni did not have a ball targeted his way. I mean, there's some things offensively that if Nebraska wants to get better as a team, they've got to be a little bit more complete with their offensive attack.
I know they said preseason, Rule had said they didn't want to run Sims all the time, but there were big chunks of that game that was their top option.
Yeah, Sims is a dynamic athlete, and his 100 yards rushing that he had was the most impressive stat line for really any player in that game offensively. I mean, he was probably, as a runner, as good of any player in the game. Unfortunately, his throwing mistakes are what cost Nebraska the game, and they've got to kind of figure out the perfect balance. They called 12 design runs for him in that game, and then he had 2 scramble runs where he took off and scrambled, and then he had the sack. So, but 12 design runs, probably a little bit on the heavy side. I would think that they'd probably like that number down more like 7 or 8 per game, but the way that game dictated, they needed those runs, every bit of them.
This is Husker Chat. We're talking with Sean Callahan from Husker Online. It's brought to you by Acres Equipment. All right, Minnesota's in the rearview mirror. Now the matchup with Colorado. I think a lot of Husker fans might have been shocked and pretty disappointed to see how good Colorado looked on Saturday against TCU. Right out of the gate, Deion Sanders has provided Colorado something they haven't had in a while.
Yeah, they completely flipped that roster, obviously brought in all new coaches, and to get that team ready to go on the road against the team that was runner-up for the national title. Now, granted, they lost a lot from a year ago, TCU, but they went in there as a 24-point dog and won straight up. Boy, you wish you would have put $10 on that because it would have paid out pretty well at the end. But Colorado, just the way they played, I don't think anybody saw that coming. And the way they looked on offense, I mean, they made it look like a 7-on-7 game. I think for Nebraska this week, that's the key. They cannot let this be a 7-on-7 game. They've got to play Big Ten bully football, push the line of scrimmage, use their physical size to an advantage, because if they try to make this a game in space, they're not going to win in Boulder.
Now, do you think the Huskers have the offensive line and the running game to do that, to slow this thing down, to limit possessions? Because from what we saw against Minnesota, Nebraska still has some issues up front.
I do. I mean, I think TCU did not go at them that way. And I think Nebraska with Jeff Sims, Gabe Ervin Jr., they're going to go downhill at Colorado and test their teeth, because TCU didn't really do that at a high level. For Nebraska to win this game, they've got to slow it down a little bit and just give body blows to Colorado, make them really play defense and try to fight in the trenches. Because in the end, I think that's their ticket to a victory right now.
You have been to plenty of Nebraska-Colorado games. You looking forward to this trip? I would think that's just going to be a crazy environment come Saturday morning.
I'll tell you, they caught a break, though. 10 a.m. local kick. That for a road team coming in, that's ideal, because it's just going to be pretty hard to get that crowd in there ready to roll that early. If this was a night game, oh my gosh, I don't even want to guess what it would be like. I think you'll see a lot of red in that stadium. A lot of people really from Kearney on west. I mean, it's a pretty reasonable drive to Boulder. And for years and years and years, people in the western part of the state of Nebraska would go to Boulder. And I think a lot of those fans have already bought their tickets, and they're going to be out there. And we saw, it was over 60, 65% Husker fans in 2019. I don't know if it's going to be quite that much, but I do think Nebraska will get a big chunk in that stadium again.
All right, we'll see how it develops on Saturday. Sean, as always, we appreciate the time. Have a safe trip out west.
Thanks, Jayson.
And that was Sean Callahan, the publisher of Husker Online, joining us for Husker Chat. We're here every week throughout the season, and it's brought to you by Acres Equipment.